on October the 22nd, 2024. To be deferred.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I beg to move that the aforesaid minutes be deferred.
Question is that these aforementioned minutes be deferred. All honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. These minutes are therefore deferred.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I beg to move the suspension of Standing Orders 6, 16, 18, 20, 42 subsection 5, 43 and 44 for the remainder of the day's sitting.
The question is that standing orders so identified by the Leader of Government's Business be so mentioned. As mentioned, honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. I want to crave your indulgence, sir, because I want to acknowledge the presence of these distinguished persons among us today who are members and workers and families of the disabled across the island. We acknowledge your presence and thank you sincerely for coming, ladies and gentlemen. Government business. Government's business is the instant order of the day. Honourable Leader? Honourable Leader of Government Business.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I beg to move the withdrawal of order number 3, which is the Human Tissue Transplant Bill 2023, as well as order number 12, the Business Barbados Bill 2024. Madam Deputy Speaker, both bills will start in the Senate with the Honourable Ministers responsible for those respective areas.
The question is that these order number 3 and order number 12 be suspended. Honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Be withdrawn. Let me say that again, please. Forgive me in my youthful situation here. The question is that orders number 3 and number 11 be withdrawn. 3 and 12 be withdrawn. All honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it. Honourable Member and Minister of People Empowerment and Elder Affairs.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I beg to move the withdrawal of order number 11 and to replace it with a resolution on national policy for improving the lives of persons with disabilities and the 2023 report of the National Advisory Committee to guide the establishment of a commission for improving the lives of persons with disabilities.
The question is that order number 11 be withdrawn and be replaced by as indicated. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. Order number 11 is withdrawn.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I beg to move the suspension of the House until 5 minutes to 11.
The question is that this honorable chamber be suspended until 5 minutes to 11. Those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it. This honorable chamber is suspended until 5 minutes to 11. This house is in session. When we woke earlier, we were at order number 11, and to that we shall revert. Honourable.
Order number 11 as revised. Resolution, to move to pass a resolution that Parliament approve the national policy for improving the lives of persons with disabilities and the 2023 National Report of the National Advisory Committee to guide the establishment of a commission for improving the lives of persons with disabilities.
Honourable Member for St. Michael South, Honourable Minister of People Empowerment and Elder Affairs.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. It is my pleasure this morning to lead this resolution on what I think is perhaps among the most important work that a parliament can do anywhere in the world, and certainly among the most important work that this parliament can do in Barbados. Permit me to say, for those who are listening and for those who have joined us in the House, the reason that we made a simple amendment to the resolution that allowed us to debate the policy as well as the report that was done by the commission, colloquially known as the Hinkson Commission, but the report of the National Advisory Committee to guide the establishment of a commission for improving the lives of persons with disabilities, is because we felt very strongly that the policy, though the policy explained the direction in which we were going as a nation and as a country, and that clearly the policy presents some remedy to a number of wrongs that have been visited on persons with disabilities in this country. We also felt it important, ma'am, to discuss and to debate the report of the advisory committee, because that was the foundation work for the policy. And indeed, that foundation work saw a level of consultation that I think is unprecedented in the history of Barbadian politics and of Barbadian policy. And I want to begin, Madam Deputy Speaker, with your permission, by thanking a few people who were instrumental in making sure that this happened. And in no particular order, but I just feel, Madam Deputy Speaker, I beg your permission so to do. I want to thank, of course, the general public for the comments that came via email submissions, online submissions, even on the call-in programs. I want to thank the public because I feel the public engagement on this issue reinforces our belief as a government that this is an issue, the rectification of it is an issue whose time has come. And I want to thank the public for coming out to the consultation meetings night after night, day after day. Madam Deputy Speaker, we had this commission led by the Honourable Member for St. James North, and I will speak to him and about him in a few. Over 75 meetings to consult to bring us to this point. I want to thank the members of the private sector, the NGO movement, all of whom came out to meetings, many of whom pledged to lend support to the ideas that are embedded in this policy as well. I would say that I have had no pushback whatsoever on most of the issues that are written into this policy, Madam Deputy Speaker. I want to thank the staff in the Ministry of People Empowerment for the work that they would have done, particularly the National Disabilities Unit, for the work that they would have done over the years. I confess that it burdens my spirit and my soul that the NDU, with the amount of work that the NDU has to do, has such a limited staff, Madam Deputy Speaker, as you are well aware, having led this movement before I had the opportunity to lead this movement and this ministry. And this is something that we hope to be able to rectify when we finish the amalgamation of the social services sector, which we are well advanced in so doing. I want to thank all of the various organizations that form the disabled community. I will not list all of them here, but I want to thank all of them. Every single one of them, because for the most part, I had the opportunity, Madam Deputy Speaker, to speak at a Barnard session last week. And I began that session by apologizing to the disabled community. And I apologize to the disabled community on behalf of every single government that has led this country, because it would be fair to say that in a country that promises so much to ordinary people, members of the disabled community can legitimately say that they were denied to benefit from that promise. That kind of distorted development is not the kind of development that we wish for this country. And again, I want to take this opportunity on behalf of a caring government to apologize to the community of persons with disabilities for the way that they have been treated in this country. But we hope, Madam Deputy Chair, Deputy Speaker, that with the work that we are doing as a government, it is clear that we are determined to rectify these wrongs. Madam Deputy Speaker, I also want to thank Mr. Hinkson and the entire advisory committee. Many of the members on the committee would have either relatives or children, or they themselves be persons with disabilities. And they informed what to me is a document that should become reading for all Barbadians. It is impossible to read that report that has been prepared by the advisory committee that speaks in such detail to what one can only refer to as almost horror in the experience of persons with disabilities. I want to thank the entire committee, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I personally want to thank the Honourable Member for St. James North, the Honourable Member, Ms. Edmund Hinkson. And I do so not because politicians glorify politicians, because this is a matter on which we have seen support on both sides. In this iteration of the Parliament and in previous iterations of the Parliament, that politicians on both sides have felt the need to do work to advance the interests of persons with disabilities. This is not a political commendation. But I do believe that the work that the Honourable Member for St. James North has been doing, whether he was a minister, a member of the government, or an opposition member, or even in his own private capacity, is nothing less than outstanding, and the country and this Parliament owes the Honourable Member for St. James North a debt of gratitude. And I would have asked him to lead this debate if the circumstances in this Parliament had allowed us so to do, because I believe he deserves to. Madam Deputy Speaker, I also feel that I need to thank the Honourable Prime Minister. And the truth is, you know, when you're young and you're talking big, people say, put your money where your mouth is. And this government certainly has put its money where its mouth is, as evidenced by the number of things that I will go through during the course of my presentation. I really, really want to thank every single member of the community of persons with disabilities who reside in Barbados. I want to thank all of them. It is not easy. The life that should have been afforded to many of them has been denied, not by virtue of a disability, but by virtue of an inability of the society to recognize that they have tremendous potential and that we should have tapped on that potential a long, long time ago. That is the work that is now before this Parliament. Last night, Madam Deputy Speaker, as I was preparing my thoughts, I called a friend of mine who is a person with a disability, a young lady. And I asked her, what would you want me to focus on during the course of my presentation? What do you want to hear? What was told to me is that I do not think you should rush to discuss the solutions that are proposed in the policy, but that you have to help Barbadians understand the challenges that we face. And while I had no intention of spending a long period on those challenges, because I feel as if many of them have been said, I will take that advice, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I will go through in some detail some of the challenges that are faced across the various ministries. Yesterday when we met as a parliamentary body, The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister said to me, I said, I do not wish to go through all of these things because there are some ministries, you know, when you go through them, ministries may think that I am taking a shot. And the Honourable Deputy Prime Minister in her wisdom said to me, if this is what was said by the persons with disabilities, then you have an obligation to report it to the country. And if it is that the ministers who are doing work in all of our various capacities, and we went through, and I look forward to the ministers speaking on their various ministries, because every single ministry in this government is doing something to advance the lives of persons with disabilities. We stand here recognizing that there are challenges, but we stand here fearless. Also recognizing that we are doing significant work to remedy these wrongs. This is not somehow a knee-jerk reaction to recent events. You would note that in the manifesto of the Barbados Labour Party, the 2022 manifesto, we spoke of establishing the committee to work on the commission. In fact, we spoke of establishing the commission. And that commission had a responsibility to come back to the country and put us in a place where we have a policy and legislation and solid recommendations to be able to improve the lives of persons with disabilities. I can only conclude that the committee has done an excellent job in what they have presented. And before I get into the substance of the presentation, Madam Deputy Chair, Speaker, while it is that we have before this House the report of the Commission, and while we have the policy, I would wish to advise the Parliament that before the end of the year, we will be back laying the legislation on improving the lives of persons with disabilities. We have the draft. The draft came. We felt that there needed to be even further consultation on the draft so that we have almost a complete document. The two disability advocates in the ministry, Madam Deputy Speaker, are doing wonderful work on behalf of the government and on behalf of the country and on behalf of the persons with disabilities. Madam Deputy Speaker, sir, and I commend both of them because persons of outstanding academic qualifications and other qualities and virtues for whom getting a job or getting a decent life in Barbados was made difficult because of our inability to recognize talent when we see it. And I want to thank Madam Deputy Speaker, Senator Andwele and Janelle for the work that they're doing as disability advocates in the Ministry of People Empowerment. They are doing an excellent job and are wonderful, wonderful ambassadors for persons with disabilities. But we did not stumble upon our position. If you look at the 2022 manifesto of the Barbados Labour Party, we pledged to resource and empower a commission. And that to begin by doing so, by examining what is the reality facing persons with disabilities. What are some of the issues that are affecting their day-to-day life? And that commission, Madam Deputy Speaker, engaged in perhaps the most extensive consultation, as I said before. There were over 75 meetings held across Barbados. And what was the overall idea taken from these meetings? Why is it that we felt they needed to meet, and with whom did they meet? The consultations were to provide information to senior policymakers and management on the vulnerabilities of persons with disabilities in all aspects of everyday life. All aspects of everyday life. And as I said, when I get to talk about some of these challenges, night after night, listening to it, it broke my heart on many occasions, Madam Deputy Speaker. Parliament is not necessarily a place for telling stories. But I trust, and I've asked and instructed the Permanent Secretary and the Ministry to capture some of these stories and to allow Barbadians to hear it, not from me, because coming from me, they might think I'm just a politician, but to allow Barbadians to hear the stories of the horrors visited on persons with disabilities or caretakers of persons with disabilities or children with disabilities by persons who in this society ought to know better. And I hope to have that series so Barbadians can hear and see for themselves. And perhaps having heard and having seen, that could lead to a change in behavior. And I assure this Parliament that the behaviors must change. The other thing we asked him to do was to obtain information on existing policies, programs, and strategies, if any, that cater to the respective needs of persons with disabilities, in accordance with the given service or the product of the given entity. In other words, if there are entities that are responsible for dealing with persons with disabilities or otherwise, what is the experience when engaging with some of these organizations? You know, Barbadians would tell you, the average Barbadian would tell you that they do not like the service they receive oftentimes from other service-oriented facilities and places. And if you do not like how you are treated, multiply that by 100 times and you still fall short of the experience oftentimes of persons with disabilities. We asked the Commission to discuss prospective policies, programs, and strategies with an aim to positively impacting the lives of persons with disabilities. We have a list of very detailed recommendations in the policy, Madam Deputy Speaker, that when implemented will make a meaningful difference in the lives of persons with disabilities. We also asked them to apprise the senior policymakers and management of the issues, having done their work, which was also done, and to propose policy programs and strategies for the advancement, which was also done. It is impossible to conclude anything else except that the work of that committee was exceptional and has allowed us to therefore have a policy that puts into the hands of the government the tools to begin to make positive change in the lives of persons with disabilities. Madam Deputy Speaker, there were a number of town hall meetings during the course of coming up with these ideas because, you know, when you are a social scientist, or when you are a community practitioner, or when you are a person experiencing something, everybody likes to tell you what the reality is. Because when you are experiencing something, you know, we say, he who feels it knows it. And that we felt we needed to capture from the community exactly what the experience was. And we began by having a series of town hall meetings. They wrote a number of organizations, including the Lions Club, Rotary Club, Kiwanis Club, the Salvation Army, the private sector, political parties. In fact, we had meetings with one version of the Democratic Labour Party, at the time led by a different person in terms of the president. And I trust that the current political leader of the Democratic Labour Party would appreciate the work that we have done. In fact, I know he will. And that there will be no political divide on this at all. And I also want to say to the leader of the opposition that at a time of his choosing, myself, the Honourable Member for St. James North, and my team would be willing to come and to meet with him as well to go through the details of this policy so that you can get the information directly from us. And of course, members of the disabled community, I'm certain, would cherish the opportunity to meet with the leader of the opposition. Because it will be a crying shame, Madam Deputy Speaker, if we were to try to make this one a political one. I said, Madam Deputy Speaker, that all of us have to recognize that we experience things differently. But he who feels it knows it. And it would be a crying shame, therefore, for anybody to say to the persons with disabilities that this is not their reality. And for many of us, we rush to defend ourselves because it becomes very difficult to sit in silence and to digest food, hard food, when it becomes something that people may think is offensive to them because it says they did not do what they were supposed to do. I would be the first to say that in the ministry responsible for social advancement, social development, whether it was the Ministry of Social Transformation, whether it was the Ministry of Social Care, whether it is the Ministry of People Empowerment, that certainly more can be done in the ministry to improve the lives of persons with disabilities. And you only have to look at the institution responsible for it, the National Disabilities Unit had 2 social workers. Very small staff, I think 14 or 15 people, some of it with admin staff. And if you look at the work over time, how that work has evolved, it is impossible for any serious entity treating to persons with disabilities to have such a limited staff. And therefore, we know that we have to do more under the National Disabilities Unit. Although the NDU becomes part of the new amalgamated entity, they would have its own directorate for persons with disabilities, but we have to hire more people and we have to be able to do more. You know, one of the things that I came to recognize is that whether it is disabilities, children, or the elderly, is that a lot of the work that became assigned to a number of these institutions and organizations is not written anywhere in law, hardly written anywhere in a proper policy, but there's nowhere to go. You're responsible for it. You go and look at the NAB. Half of the things that NAB has to do for the elderly is not written anywhere. So we have to begin by looking at the policy. But 76 meetings. Then the advisory committee also engaged in a media program, visiting various persons, visiting various media houses, discussing the work that they were doing. And extensive contributions were received. Extensive contributions. So I want to begin by setting that context because it is important for the public to understand that this was a serious committee doing serious work, and that this is not an academic exercise driven by persons whose only interest is to prepare a document that will sit on somebody's shelf, which is the reality for many documents in the government service from across all ministries. And I'm telling you what I know because I've been a former public servant, a senior public servant for a number of years. Many of these ministries have documents, well-written, well-researched, never once implemented, just sitting on a shelf. That will not be the case with this policy. In fact, I have already said that the legislation will be in this parliament by the end of the year. That's the first step. But I want to, Madam Deputy Speaker, go through some of the challenges that were explained to me. And I do so, Madam Deputy Speaker, with a sense of great regret. Because when you think you have it rough, many times, someone else has it a whole lot rougher. Healthcare. Madam Deputy Speaker, we in Barbados, we have a health system of which we can boast. And don't let anybody fool you. When I get sick anywhere in the world, I hope to get sick in Barbados. If I feel unwell and I'm in the great US, I wonder why I can't be home. When I'm in Europe, the same thing. I prefer to visit our local hospital. And many people must appreciate too, even if you are an American and you live in the States, if you don't have insurance and you show up at the hospital, you're in a lot of trouble. So Barbados has a healthcare system. It may not be perfect, but the average Barbadian knows that if they feel unwell, they could get up and go to a hospital. And that's a fact. The hospital is not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. But we know that you could get up the day you feel unwell and go to the hospital. You could go give birth, don't get a bill the next day saying that you owe the hospital $20,000. But having met with the persons with disabilities, some of the things that they felt were that in relation to the delivery of medical treatment and patient care at the QEH, for them, it was poor or inadequate. Poor or inadequate access to regular and quality dental care for adults. Some dentists denied oral care due to behavioral concerns. Now, I don't know that you could tell a child or a person, because you have adults who are autistic, who have the functioning cognitive capacity of a child, that when they sit in this chair, open your mouth, say, ah, and that everything is going to be fine. Now, I know dentists have their own schedules, they have their time set and so on, but it becomes a challenge, and some people say we will not deal with them. Then they would have said to us that in order for that to happen, many of them have to pay for the child to be sedated. They do not have the resources to pay for the child to be sedated. So, and then, of course, for many persons, there are extra dental issues. So the people who need the dental support the most cannot get the dental support necessarily because of the way some of the children may behave if they have a disability or the adult with a disability. Now I understand the dentist, so this is not me trying to put blame on anybody. I understand it. But at the end of the day, we have a significant portion of our society who is unable to access proper dental care. The other issue that they felt was that there were communication challenges experienced by those who are deaf in the healthcare system. I must tell you, Madam Deputy Speaker, it is a pleasure to stand where I stand and look across the Parliament and see interpretation for the deaf and the hearing impaired. It is something I wish we would do every time so that persons in the community could follow the debates in Parliament. But that they felt they could not communicate during that time. You know, during COVID, when all of us would wear our masks to prevent ourselves from catching COVID, when we started having conversations about that period, now it was hard, COVID was hard on everybody. But imagine if you have to rely on reading somebody's lips to be able to communicate, to be able to understand. And that during COVID for about 2 years, everybody in a mask. So you do not have the capacity now to be able to communicate. You can't understand what people are saying. It was a very difficult time, but even outside of COVID, it is a difficult time. COVID compounded what was already a bad situation. Now I'm taking my time, Madam Deputy Speaker, to go over these challenges. I won't go over all because it would take me perhaps 3 presentations. But it was very, very difficult during COVID for persons with disabilities. The other issue that was raised was having to incur the cost of expensive medication that is not listed on the Barbados Drug Service. Depending on the nature or the categorization of the disability, it was a recurring expense. It tells me that we have to look very carefully at what some of these medications are for persons with disabilities, and to be in a better position to be able to provide some support. We may not be, as a society, may not be able to hire everybody. The disability grant may not be high enough to make everybody do things, but there are other things that we can do to make life a little bit easier, a little less costly. If we can do these things with medication, then we begin to scratch the surface. What was recommended, Madam Deputy Speaker, so I'm not going over all, what was recommended, and I suspect that persons in the medical field will have no objection to this, and I say so because when we did the child protection legislation, and we spoke to the doctors, many of the doctors just said we would be willing to help with a number of these things if you could provide the training on how to report, where to report, also if you respond when we report, and certain things. The recommendation coming from the community was that healthcare providers undergo more specialized training in detection of disabilities so that they know. The provision of additional free healthcare services such as dental care should be extended to adult persons with disabilities, as many can't afford these services. The state should allocate a budget to finance public dental care for adults and explore the feasibility of establishing a central dental department. Dental issues were a major part of the conversation we were having around persons with disabilities. A major part. It's something that we really seriously have to look at. The certified interpreter should be assigned to public health spaces. Just imagine if you are sick or if you are in pain and you are not in a position to properly communicate that you are sick or that you are in pain. Even when you know, as a fully able-bodied person, what your issue is. It is so difficult to tell the doctor what it is. Because the doctor starts asking you, is the pain here? Is the pain there? Do you feel it when you breathe? When did you start experiencing this pain? You know, it becomes very difficult. You can't even isolate it. You just know you don't feel well. But if you are not in a position to be able to communicate that at all, That is why I say that for every single issue an able-bodied person has in any of our institutions, it could be multiplied 100 times for other persons with disabilities. And so that is something that we have to look at. They also advised of a fast-track system to assist with some of these things. And Madam Deputy Speaker, there were a number of other issues. The report details these issues. I will not go through all of them, but I recommend this report, honestly, as reading for every Barbadian. On education, Madam Deputy Speaker, the United Nations Education, Scientific and Cultural Organization, UNESCO, had estimated about 90% of children with disabilities in developing countries do not attend school. That's a significant amount. If you consider that Barbadians already, if you look at the dependency ratio, we have an aging population, we have fewer children. If we have some of our children who are not being able to attend school, then we compound what is already a bad situation, Madam Deputy Speaker. And in Barbados, some of our children with disabilities do not attend school. And we boast in Barbados about our education. And even though education has made strides in many ways for persons with disabilities, I'm sure if you were to ask any of the persons with disabilities who made it to Parliament this morning, I also want to commend them for being here. But if you ask any person across Barbados how they feel about the education system, they would tell you that they feel hurt. And for those of us, I said last week, for those of us who understand social policy or social policy research, there is a concept referred to as participatory research methodology. And unlike quantitative analysis and unlike some components of qualitative analysis, the only real determinant of whether something is true or not is if the person who experienced it says this is true or not, if they feel it to be true. That is the real issue there. Does this sound like the truth to me? And I am pretty sure that to persons with disabilities, this sounds like the truth to them. Many are unable to be able to access school. And then when they go to school, they tell us that they do not feel they have the benefit of a good education for a number of reasons at the schools. Many spoke about the fees that they had to endure to be able to conduct disability assessments on themselves and for their children. Some were denied admission into schools based on incontinence, Madam Deputy Speaker. Now, this is something that you can't control, Madam Deputy Speaker. And a society that is supposed to be as advanced as ours think it is should know better and should do better. I must remind this chamber that the average Barbadian is almost 50. That in another 20 years, the average Barbadian is going to be bragging for 65, 70. Many of us heading toward incontinence too. So this idea that there is a world for them and a world for us is a nonsense. It is a nonsense. And even if that were not our reality, and it is, the fact is that we have to care because there's some people, some children, some parents who would tell you that in this Barbados, their children were denied access to school because of incontinence. And a child with a disability would not be able to control themselves the same way as a regular child. I almost told a story of my own daughter just now, but her mother may not forgive me if I tell that particular story. The point is, though, accidents happen. But if we know that because of the life of a person with a disability, it is not an accident, it is part of these course of things. We have to put in place systems in place to be able to deal with it. And a number of other things were listed: limited, outdated, and unsuitable teaching aids and assistive learning devices, outdated assessment methodologies. Just at the benefit of education. Education is the one thing that has lifted the vast majority of Barbadians out of poverty. A few generations ago, most of us of color were all confined to plantations. Few generations hence, some of us forget that it was by virtue of education that we were allowed to move from one place to another. It is a sin almost to deny persons with disability that same opportunity. We have to do something in our education system, and I am sure, Madam Deputy Speaker, as I said at the beginning, a number of things are happening in education. I am reporting what was said to me during the course of our 76 meetings across Barbados. And these are not new. These are issues that were going on for decades. And in fact, what they would say to you is that in many cases, some things have gotten better, but the pace at which we are improving is not fast enough. And when the honourable members responsible for the various ministries speak, I do hope they speak to the things that they are doing in their ministries, as was advised by the Honourable Deputy Prime Minister. But there are a number of things that are happening across Barbados, but until persons with disabilities start to feel it, then we still have a lot of work to do. Some of the recommendations that were put forward was that we ensure that a state fund as intended for children with disabilities was put in place and allocated for that purpose. And I will speak shortly to the adjustments we made at the NAS. They asked for assigning additional teaching aids and teachers and teaching assistants throughout the school. And you know, I said to myself a number of these nights, to be honest, listening to the community of persons with disabilities, that there was a remarkable grace in their spirit. Because I do not know that I could be placed to endure the hardships that are visited upon the community of persons with disabilities and still be in such a jovial, engaging, trusting mood. And I feel that this government has earned the trust of persons with disabilities and that we must not violate it. And that during the course of the next few years, we must put in place the things that are listed in this policy to make life better for persons with disabilities, and that education is the one thing that we have to be able to fix. When we get to employment, Madam Deputy Speaker, the Honourable Member in the Senate, Senator Andwele, whose name I called earlier, we spoke yesterday about the idea of meritocracy. This idea that employers say, man, if the person got the qualifications, I can hire them. Man, if the person got the degree, I can hire them. So I am not disadvantaging anybody, because as long as the person qualified, I can hire them. But that is a bias, because the probability of a person having those qualifications is slim. The people who make it through university in Barbados are heroes, because the system isn't cut out for them to get there at all. When I was at university, my good friend, he was probably the first, Craig Nurse, permit me to say, was probably the first. And he had it hard. And since then, everybody else had it hard. It's getting a little better, but it's still hard. But the employer would want to tell you, if you bring the qualifications, you will get the job. If you have all the experience in the world, when nobody would hire you in the first place, you will get the job. If you present the perfect attitude, having been hurt time after time by every single institution, by a number of the persons that you meet, oh, you will get the job. And I am saying that there has to be a system of what we call positive discrimination or affirmative action that allows persons with disabilities to be able to work. And I will speak to that when I get there. But the education system is something that we obviously have to be able to review. I mean, oh my goodness, there are, in this particular section, when I look at the issues, they went from A to S. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P, Q, R, S. As was 16, at least. If somebody watching and they're going to say, Kurt, I'm going to say S is 16, you know. I did it quick. The point is, they got enough issues in education for years that have to be addressed. And we have begun to do some of the addressing some of these things, Madam Deputy Speaker, more diagnostic testing they're asking for, a special needs curriculum be developed by the Ministry of Education, the current practice of allocating 15 minutes additional time. Madam Deputy Speaker, this came up so many times. The current practice of allocating 15 minutes additional time to sit examinations be extended to qualifying students as is reasonable in the circumstances. I feel like when I met with the persons with disabilities, we were not met by a bunch of angry, vicious persons trying to tear down a country. We were met by people who were interested and eager to build up this country, but that we were denying them the opportunity so to do. That is what matters. And so what we see here are rational proposals in what we call the Hinkson Report, Madam Deputy Speaker, many of which you will see extended to the policy. The other major issue was in transportation. Transportation is a major and a concurrent problem for persons with disabilities. Traversing to and from various places across Barbados is extremely costly and very difficult. Even for the two brilliant disability advocates who work in our ministry, if they're unable to get a drop, when they tell me what they have to pay in taxi fare to get to the office, sometimes I feel terrible when I insist, like I did yesterday, that they have to come in because it is so costly. And in their case, they may have the fortune of people who may be willing to provide them a ride here and there, but many people don't, Madam Deputy Speaker. Many people do not have that opportunity. And the transportation needs of persons with disabilities are underserviced, even in the National Disabilities Unit, where we offered, I think, at the beginning we had no vehicles, then we had one vehicle, then we had two vehicles. I think now we have about three vehicles, with a purchase for 2 additional vehicles. The government approved the purchase of 2 more vehicles. But with 5 vehicles, when stocked fully, and I know we're asking for more vehicles in these estimates, we still will not have enough vehicles to transport persons with disabilities. So sometimes you may hear a person call and say, well, I called the disabilities unit and I was unable to get transportation. We just don't have the capacity to be able to transport persons to every single appointment. And it becomes a burden on the persons. In addition, at the NDU, they told us that the working hours are only regular government hours, but people got things to do in the evening too. Now, we should extend those hours to allow us to be able to transport persons with disabilities. The other thing is that there's a ride, I'm told, that you can call if you're a person with a disability, and they will take you, the bus, they will let you know when the bus is coming, you take the bus to where you have to go, but there's no guarantee that you will get a bus that is disabled friendly to get back. And so many people go one place and are stranded when they get to that place. There's some things, Madam Deputy Speaker, that I think we have to be able to rectify. They want buses to be outfitted with an alert system, features in the event of an emergency while on the route, because they wouldn't know otherwise. The private transportation sector be assisted through financial and technical incentives in modifying their vehicles to accommodate and to provide wider transportation for persons with disabilities, so that everybody has access to every vehicle. You don't gotta wait for NDU. This is one of the things that trouble me the most. If you are a person with disability, they only want you to speak on disabilities. Like, you don't have the capacity to speak on every single issue because you don't live in a country like everybody else. If you are a person with disability, when it's time for work, go and work in an area responsible or related to persons with disabilities. Because you can work in a bank, or you can go and work in the Ministry of Finance, or some other place. Again, even as we attempt to help, our own biases prevent us from helping in a positive way. And if you are a person with disability, you gotta wait on a special bus. You should be able to catch a bus, because our buses should be disabled friendly. That is the direction that we have to go in this country. And I implore the community of persons with disabilities, many of whom now are my good friends. I call them all the time. The most honorable Madam Deputy Speaker, permit me to say, Kariana Phil, knows that I message her all the time. I torment her. Roseanne Tudor, I was messaging her this weekend. I torment her too. Chris, all of them. Because I know that I do not know exactly what the experience is, but that I am duty-bound in my role as minister to rectify it, and I am ethically, morally, and spiritually committed as a human being to making it right. Madam Deputy Speaker, a lot of what I'm saying obviously is known to you because you were a minister. And a lot of this work you were involved in before we came. And that I am seeing through a lot of what was started under your leadership. So a lot of what I'm saying through you is to Barbados and to the other members in this place, Madam Deputy Speaker, most of whom are well aware about the issues we face. If there's one thing I am grateful for, and there's so much here I realize now I can't even go through all the things I have planned to go through. We can be here till 6 o'clock, and I see people looking at me already like I'm talking too long. But Madam Deputy Speaker, I want to convey to the House, as I move on, I will move on. I want to convey to the House, Madam Deputy Speaker, a number of the issues in housing. We as a government said that we were going to give 10% of all new houses to persons with disabilities, and it was a promise made and it was a promise kept. The Honourable Minister responsible for housing, if he speaks in this discussion, or if I could speak for him, would tell you that all of the new houses that we build, 10% are allocated for persons with disabilities. But many people would say that even as houses are built now, they're not built for people in wheelchairs. The bathrooms, and this is not only in government, this is period. So you're not really trying to sell this house to a person with disability, for sure. Because you probably done decide in your mind, but the people in the disability community, only 10% of them working. Of that, only 2% of them got jobs that they could probably get a mortgage. Of that, when you take out all the other expenses of life, you're talking about 0.5%. So for the vast majority of private builders, they're not catering to persons with disabilities. There's no money in it. So they're not building for it. We will mandate certain things, though. We will mandate certain things for employment. And if you want to be a builder and you want to build 1 million houses, we have to mandate certain things for persons with disabilities too. If we as a government committed to giving 10% of all of our houses to persons with disabilities, the private sector got to start lifting the game too. And allocate some of their houses to persons with disabilities. You will see when the legislation comes, the legislation is forceful. I expect, to be honest, when the legislation comes, for some people to, march against certain components of it, but not the right thinking people. And I don't expect, when they do, for there to be any large gathering of anybody, because most people know. Most people know. I am thankful to be in a government, Madam Deputy Speaker, that has a man like an honourable member, like the member for St. James North, who is dealing with this issue. A Prime Minister, Madam Deputy Speaker, who I'm sure would allow me to say that, as she said to me many times in private conversations, and as she has already said in here, grew up with an aunt who was also disabled. And for whom, when I have these conversations about disability, I always receive an ear. The Honourable Minister in the Ministry of Finance, who has a son with a disability, and who has never hidden it for a second, as many people in Barbados still do. And I can go to him too, as we just did for the additional buses, to be able to get progress. And many of us now dealing with aging parents, recognizing that there are things that many of us are going to have to face. I am really proud to be part of this government because I feel that this government perhaps is the one government where a number of the members and the membership of this Barbados Labour Party administration is very serious about improving the lives of persons with disabilities. Don't get me wrong. I know enough things still have to be done. And I suspect that the persons who are here from the disabled community would tell me that there are a number of things that also have to be done. I know this. I am no fool. But I also know that they would say that they can see things are being done. And I anticipate when we bring the legislation by the end of November or by December, the end of November or by December, when we bring the legislation to this Parliament, that we will have even more people, and we already have a full house in here of the community of persons with disabilities. Madam Deputy Speaker, I believe that trust is an essential part of advancing social programs and advancing social policy. If you do not trust the persons with whom you are having a relation, everything does go haywire in all relationships. If you cannot trust your partner, it becomes problematic for you to function. It becomes problematic for you to believe what they're saying. But if you can see incremental things being done, yes, the big things aren't achieved yet, but you can see the little things being done, then you start to believe. The other issue that came up for transportation, obviously, would be the parking spots. And the fact that many persons with disabilities feel that we are not serious enough in relation to how we address the issues pertaining to parking across Barbados. And it is something that we have to address. We have to have more parking facilities. And then when we do have them, we have to make sure that the persons with disabilities are the people who are actually parking in the parking spots. You know, Barbadians now are becoming a little bit more sensitive, I think. A little bit more. You go to the cinema or the mall, you find the parking spots are empty, more so now than before. You go other places, you find it more so now. But the ones in town, I feel that because people probably ain't going to the cinema, the ones in town, no matter what time you go, somebody parking in the spot. Somebody parks in the spot. The police have been kind enough to us. You see from time to time their programs where they heighten the work that they do to prevent people from parking in the parking spots. We will continue to be able to do more. So we need more spots, so we need more enforcement. And I know the Honourable Deputy Prime Minister is working on increasing the fees for the people who park in these spots, Madam Deputy Speaker. And people sometimes only realize it when they have a slight injury, you know, how difficult it is to get around. When we were in Japan last year, we visited a number of places responsible for improving the lives of persons with disabilities at all the sports facilities. We visited education facilities. One of the things we did was to put on something over our eyes and to try to play a game, a regular game. It was so difficult. The things that we take for granted in this life. You know, my mother used to play a song about this man who said the only thing he wants out of life is money. But if you can see, and if you can walk, if you can hear, and if you can talk, then be grateful for what you've got. Because to some folk, these things would mean a lot. Madam Deputy Speaker, we have now in this Parliament, we had in the Senate, persons with disabilities. Madam Deputy Speaker, I really think the time has come for persons with disabilities to be in both houses so that we can drive real policy in this space. I know that I've reaped the benefit of surrounding myself with persons with disabilities. Madam Deputy Speaker, I will do formal employment and then I will run through the rest. Because I intend to be back in here within 2 months to do the legislation. So in relation to formal employment and entrepreneurship, I said before that a number of persons with disabilities are unemployed. The ILO estimates it as high as 80%. Our 2022 census, our 2010 census found that 90% of persons with disabilities were unemployed. 90%. No, come on. 90% of persons with disabilities in 2010 were unemployed. There's nothing to believe that much has changed. We in the ministry, we brought on about 5 persons with disabilities. I do not know that statistically significant enough to move the needle. We need to bring on more. But I don't think that employment should only be for the Ministry of People Empowerment for people with disabilities. 90%? Now, if 90% of men were unemployed, this country would be in an uproar. 90% of all women were unemployed, the country would be in an uproar. Far less, the country would not be able to produce. Such is the contribution of women to Barbadian society. And there is a gender policy that we are working on that I hope to be able to discuss in this Parliament at some point too, because there are issues in gender that have to be settled. and that there are issues in gender for persons with disabilities that also have to be settled. We had a conversation once, the most Honourable Carrie Ann Eiffel and myself, about the reproductive rights of persons with disabilities. And people get tender when you raise this topic. But that rights that every single other Barbadian is entitled to in Barbados should be allowed for persons with disabilities, in as much as they have the cognitive capacity to be able to make their own decisions. That is a conversation perhaps for another time, but one that I hope to have soon. Because I remember a conversation when the young lady who works as the disability advocate in my ministry, when she did her lecture, Janelle Odell, when she spoke, when she said after giving birth, the doctors and the others in the room wanted to know, first of all, where you getting a child, who gonna raise that, all kind of things. Like, you're not a human. Like, you're not a human. And these things have to change, Madam Deputy Speaker. But in relation to formal employment, we have to find a way to be able to do so. I'm not going to go through it. But I do know that we have established in the policy the idea of a quota. The idea that some employers, based on their size, should hire persons with disabilities. We also then, in the legislation, put specific teeth around the hiring of persons with disabilities. Because if 90% is unemployed, it tells me that we can't wait for it to happen by happenstance. It is not going to happen. We have to put in place serious policies and programs, serious enforceable legislation to ensure that we can hire persons with disabilities in Barbados. And of course, the employers have their concerns. They spoke about the accessibility, the need to retrofit their spaces, the same one that I raised before about people not having the skills and those things. It is a conversation that we're going to have, but I believe that it's an important conversation and one that we need to have soon. They spoke of establishing a committee, a persons with disability committee within the Ministry of Labour, because they know that there is a problem and that they hope that the Ministry of Labour is the organization to be best able to fix the problem that they have. Madam Deputy Speaker, I want to speak about the policy. I could go on and go on. The other issues that are raised in the report are fairly significant. Accessibility, legal rights and access to justice, social security and provision of social services. I spoke about the social services sector before. I am the minister responsible for the social services sector. There are a number of things that I want to bring some changes to, that this government is committed to bringing changes to. You know, I tell my staff all the time that rectifying these wrongs for persons with disabilities is now my most urgent priority. The most urgent priority for the ministry. Nothing else is more important. Because human beings in Barbados deserve to live with a certain amount of dignity no matter where they are. The other issue that was raised was in relation to insurance. We had a meeting with the insurance companies and they said basically that they don't have a problem insuring people with disabilities. But that what was said to us during the course of the meetings is that they have issues insuring persons with disabilities. Like, many of them will tell you that they can't get insurance. Can't get insurance. Many of them with no ailment outside of being disabled in some form. We had a meeting before. We are scheduled to have another meeting, I think, in November. But we have to bring this one we have to sell this one. Because I know when you get sick in Barbados, if you don't have insurance, especially if you get a major ailment, I've watched people with means have nothing very quickly because they come into contact with sickness. We should not deny persons with disabilities the opportunity to be able to get access to medical treatment. Banking and access to financial services was also an issue that was raised. Madam Deputy Speaker, there are so many, I don't even think I have time to go through all of them. I commend the report for Barbadians to read, though, as important reading. Madam Deputy Speaker, there were also some things that we did well, and there were a number of achievements under this administration. I will go through a few before I go through very quickly the policy. I believe that the policy represents the most progressive, targeted, innovative, forward-thinking policy that we have seen in Barbados in relation to persons with disabilities. We saw when I was at the Ministry of the Ministry of Social Transformation, there was some work that was done to advance the lives of persons with disabilities too. We had a white paper. There were a number of consultations under the then Minister Hamilton Lashley, and then eventually under the Honourable Member for St. Michael East. There were some consultations held under him as well. So we were able to do a number of things. But Madam Deputy Speaker, we did not do enough. And that this policy that I will go through in short order provides the example of a number of the things that we would have done. I want to begin first in looking at the achievements by thinking about what we just did at the National Insurance Scheme. Madam Deputy Speaker, the truth is, as I explained, I went through great lengths to explain that there are a number of persons with disabilities who have no income at all. And that traditionally there were just two categories that benefited from national insurance benefits. We've expanded out those categories now. We've added 4 additional categories. We added cerebral palsy, multiple sclerosis, we added autism and Down syndrome. We also added the children who were affected by some of these conditions. So far, when I last checked, we had added 760 or so persons to the National Insurance Scheme. This administration, providing financial support for 760 persons or so who were not the beneficiary of such support. And that comes at a total cost to the government so far, because as more people come forward to report it, we would have to make sure that we provide for those additional people. That added a cost of $6,400,000 every year to ensure that persons with disabilities have access to some financial resources. $6.4 million for the 760 persons. And Madam Deputy Speaker, I am convinced that more persons are going to come forward. Because the truth is that there was no real incentive for persons with disabilities to come forward. Why come forward if there is nothing in it for you? If you feel that when you engage with the institutions, that the institutions with which you engage are not going to treat you fairly. So very few of them would have come forward originally. And so at the National Insurance Scheme now, just this month, this October, an additional 758 persons and growing who now have access to benefits that were not traditionally getting access to benefits. We increased in the ministry by 40% all of the agencies responsible for persons with disabilities. 40%. That's a significant increase. Seeing a number of organizations now that benefit from the support of the government. Most of these organizations, Madam Deputy Speaker, represent people. And they have said to us that they are grateful for the increase. I believe that it would be nice if we could increase that even more. And we have, in our estimates, added a little bit more trala in the deal. And we could only hope that when the Ministry of Finance looks at all of its various issues, that they're in a position to maybe raise this here by something else. But we went through the organizations we added. I said publicly to persons in the disability community, form an association. If it is that you have a peculiar disability, as some have said, because some people have written to me or called me and said, oh, I am not in any of these categories, my child's disability is not defined, I therefore do not have access to these resources. Fair enough. If you can form an association, find other persons, 1, because it advances your cause, but 2, because it allows us to negotiate with you better. Some of the other things that we would have been responsible for, as you all know, we would have bought transport board buses, 3 vehicles, particularly to transport persons with disabilities. We did that. The one little thing we did at the disability units facilities where there were 50 names, I think, of persons who would have worked in this space, and their names are now permanently inscribed on a wall there as recognition, because many people who do this kind of work are not recognized for the work that they do. And I want to use this opportunity on the floor of Parliament to thank all of the persons who for years have worked tirelessly in this vineyard without any recognition. This government and this country and the persons with disabilities remain very thankful to all of those persons, Madam Deputy Speaker. We reintroduced training for newly visually impaired persons as well to be able to do some of these things, Madam Deputy Speaker, because it is not easy. It is not easy being a person with disabilities in Barbados. And then there are a whole range of other positive things that I will not go through today, Madam Deputy Speaker, because for me, taking the advice that was given to me last night, my job is to communicate to Barbadians today what is the lived experience of persons with disabilities. But I do want to go through very quickly some components of the policy, and that there were a number of priority areas outlined in the policy, which began, Madam Deputy Speaker, with us outlining what our values are and what our principles are. And essentially, our values spoke to dignity, it spoke to inclusiveness. It spoke to us being able to make sure that persons with disabilities can live a decent life. So what was priority area number one? And I should say, Madam Deputy Speaker, that the policy is meant to have a 7-year implementation. So some things are short-term, some things are medium-term, some things are long-term in the policy. Not everything is meant to be achieved today. But what is policy goal number one? And each of these have great detail behind them. And I will not go through all of them today, but each of them have strategies, very targeted, very marked, very real things that we must do across Barbados to be able to do better. You know, I keep remembering when we did the walk from childcare up to the disabilities unit, and when we got there by the turn, where just after, where the left would take you back to the John Beckles Day Nursery, and the right would take you up to the roundabout. I don't even know what that is properly called, but right there the road is deliberately rough because it's a turning point and you might skid out if you turn there. The road is rough. And the representative from the Multiple Sclerosis Society in a wheelchair, she said to me, tomorrow I am going to feel this. Because while we have put in place something to stop the vans from sliding out, the fact that it was so rough meant for her that it was going to be a torturous experience the next day. You know, for every action we know, according to Newton, there is an equal and opposite reaction. We have to think through our social policies. But accessibility, what is the policy goal? We want to ensure that persons with disabilities have access on an equal basis with others to the physical environment and transportation, information and communication and other facilities and services open to the wider public. Generally, we want to facilitate access to the built environment and facilitate access to transportation. And for each of these policy frameworks, initiatives, there is great detail. And as I said, I can't go through all today or we will be here the entire day. Number two, adequate standard of living and social protection, policy goal. Ensure that persons with disabilities have an adequate standard of living and access to necessary social protection to address the diverse needs in Barbados. By that, we have to implement provision of adequate standard of living and provision of necessary forms of social protection. You know, Madam Deputy Speaker, when you are responsible for making sure that the social component of disaster relief is best understood and best implemented, you realize that a lot of the responses that we implement, first of all, a lot of the responses we implement are not even suited for persons who are dealing with tragedy, because people who are dealing with a disaster or a tragedy are not coping under normal circumstances as they would. So there is a need for us to recognize that. I'm thankful that most of the officers, the social workers, most of the staff we have are well trained and they understand that. There's a need for wider training. But if you have a person who has just lost everything in a fire, as we have had now several fires, and I commend the work of the Resilience Unit for responding to a number of these fires. We created the Resilience Unit in the ministry to be able to do just that. And many of my colleagues, including myself, we've had fires, and we saw the benefit. The Honourable Member for the City of Bridgetown is shaking his head. We saw the benefit of having that Resilience Unit. The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister more recently saw the benefit of having such a unit. It made sense. But that many people who have disabilities are not included in that component of the conversation. How do you prepare to move a person who has a wheelchair, who's cognitively impaired, who, for them, moving to a facility becomes such a threatening experience in their own real experience? What systems will we put in place to be able to make sure that we handle that well? And so that even as we create solutions, our solutions must be more thorough to be able to address these things. I said last week when I spoke, if we say we have no sin, we deceive ourselves and the truth is not in us. Many of us have done a lot of work, but we still have a lot of work to do. Anything other than to say that, the truth would not be in us. We have a lot of work to do. Our solutions are good, but they could be better. The improvements that persons with disabilities have seen have been significant, but they could be more significant. In terms of awareness building, Madam Deputy Speaker, policy goal number 3, we want to foster widespread awareness, education, and knowledge about persons with disabilities, and to promote positive societal attitudes and reduce discrimination in Barbados. Madam Deputy Speaker, we heard of stories of people not wanting to stop a bus because they knew the person had a disability. We heard of stories of people laughing at people with disabilities in some of the most unfortunate of circumstances. We know of parents telling their children not to play with other children with disabilities as if it's something you can catch. Madam Deputy Speaker, that children generally are prone to love. A lot of what you see children displaying on the playing field and these views and these values, they got from the mother, they got from their father, they got from their brother. It is a social thing. But we have to be able to change these attitudes around persons with disabilities, Madam Deputy Speaker. We have to be much more inclusive. I'm telling you, to me, the greatest example is still in employment. This idea that the Ministry of People Empowerment is the only place where persons with disabilities can be hired. But when you travel the world, years ago, I mean, this is now the norm in the US and in England, but when I first went to the UK 20-something years ago, you just saw people doing all kinds of jobs. It was mind-boggling. Like, how could you possibly be able to do that? When the question I should have asked myself was not how were you able to do that, is why isn't the Barbadian society, economy not allowing you to do that? We have to reverse the questions we ask ourselves, because the limitation is ours. The limitation is not in the persons with disabilities. We have to be able to change the attitude. I believe a number of the stories that we will share. And the other thing is that I don't think this is a case of people coming cap in hand, begging for nothing. The narrative that a person with disability brings no skill is nothing but a burden is a nonsense. And we have to change that narrative. I speak of a community with great compassion, great skills, great values, many who have a stronger desire to work than many able-bodied persons don't have the opportunity so to do. That is the community of which I am now speaking. We have to change our attitudes around the way we are speaking about and to persons with disabilities. Employment, work, and economic opportunities, we listed some of those things. The policy goals for education speak to ensuring that persons with disabilities have access to high-quality, inclusive education. We recommend a strategy that facilitates access to quality education, learning support services, and resources. We speak to facilitating access to training, lifelong learning, and developmental programs. These are the things that we are speaking to in this policy. And as I said, we're not going to be able to do everything overnight, but there are a number of things that make sense. We spoke of employment, we spoke of health, we spoke of legal recognition and access to justice for persons with disabilities, and I'm sure the Honourable Member for St. James North might be better able to go through that than I ever could. We spoke of participation in society, protection in disasters and emergencies, protection of rights to life, integrity, freedom, and liberties, to policy, and we outlined policy goals. We spoke as well in a number of the regional and international cooperation, respect for privacy, home, and for family life. Look, every component of life we address in this policy, recognizing that in every component of life, persons with disabilities are disadvantaged. They are badly disadvantaged. I want to commend the University of the West Indies, Madam Deputy Speaker, to allow me to say Professor Dwayne Devonish, who worked with the ministry to develop this policy. It is a very extensive piece of work. We then went on after this to talk about monitoring and evaluation. We then went on to look at the institutional arrangements, whether they be strategic, functional, or operational, to be able to drive home this policy. This is serious work, Madam Deputy Speaker. We've already started in the ministry looking at how we're going to change up our systems to be able to better deliver this work, Madam Deputy Speaker. So as I conclude, Madam Deputy Speaker, I want to thank, as I did in the beginning, all of the members of the committee. I want to thank all the members who lead or participate in a number of disability organizations, and there are a number of them. I want to encourage the private sector to do a little bit more for persons with disabilities. Have those conversations. You know, see if you can employ them. If you don't want to employ, well, as I said, we're going to be having conversations around the law, but also see if you can support some of the organizations. My view, which I've made very clear to the ministry, my view is that the government must become a facilitator. There's some things that the government does not have to do. When we speak of increasing these subsidies to a number of these organizations, it is so that they can do the work because they have more legitimacy in this space than any government organization. We increase the subsidies and the subventions to them, allow them to do the work, expand their capacity, they can then hire more people, Madam Deputy Speaker. I feel that we should support the Autism Association, even now as they're working to build out the facility over by the garrison, the facility that this government made available to them. This government made it available to them, and I know that they're thankful for it, but I feel that we can put in place, because we must build a respite facility. I know that facility has or will have the capacity to offer some respite. We help them to finish it. And then they, in turn, will be able to cater to a number of these persons. This institutional reform, this new thing, this new thinking, this shift is a paradigm shift, because people believe that the government must be responsible for everything. So if you hear over the next few months that the ministry has increased subsidies and subventions to the community of persons with disabilities, it is what it is. It is a strategic intervention deliberately designed and determined to empower the organizations that have a legitimacy at the grassroots level for persons and with disabilities. So we intend to continue to raise that level of support. And that they do that level of work, we offer the training to help them to be able to do it. They deliver the work. And then as a government and as a country, we are able to benefit from the work that is being done, but we cannot constrain and hold back and feel that the only show in town is the government show. It has to be that the NGO movement in this country, particularly for persons with disabilities, is given the legitimacy to be able to do their work. And the truth is, they have done excellent work on behalf of their membership over the last few years, and we must commend them for the work that they have done on behalf of persons with disabilities. All of them. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, I close by thanking the members of the community. I thank my colleagues on this side, I give the assurance to this Parliament that by the end of the year, we must have the legislation to make real some of the things that we promised in the policy. I thank from the bottom of my heart the community of persons with disabilities for the love that they show me on a daily basis. Sometimes I don't believe I deserve it, but I want to thank them for the love and the support that they have given me as minister thus far. And I hope that I have not disappointed them, and if I have, I hope they give me the opportunity to rectify it. I trust that we as a government, when we implement the various programs across the different ministries, we are able to do the things that have been expressed as the things that need to be done in the policy and in the report, and that they can look at all the work that we have done and say to this government and to this country, well done, thy good and faithful servant. Madam Deputy Speaker, I beg that this resolution be read a second time. Do now pass.
I rise to second the motion and to reserve my right to speak.
Honourable Leader of the Opposition, our members and Vice.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm obliged to you. I listened to the full extent of the presentation of the Honourable Member for St. Michael's South, and I heard his appeal, I heard his plea, and he has my assurance that this Parliament today finds consensus on the issue of this resolution. I know the public has gotten used to differences in here, and that is normal. That is normal within a parliament. But let me pause and, as he did, welcome our guests today to this place that often and more often than not expresses difference and contention on issues, and to give our guests and to give the public the assurance that there's no sin, there's no parliamentary sin in ideological or philosophical conflict. That is what a parliament is about. This word parliament deriving itself from the French word parler, parlement, a place of speech. And when we congregate in this place of speech, as government and opposition respectively, there's no rule that always we will find consensus. Our speech, respectively, will represent our philosophical positions on issues. And those philosophical positions are often contrasting. Those philosophical positions are often at conflict, one against the other. Your presence, however, may I, Madam Deputy Speaker, welcome our guests with the news today that their presence finds us in a zone not of contention, but in a zone of consensus. This issue is far too serious and urgent an issue for us to find contention, except that we must find consensus, and find that consensus with the purpose of further advancing the interests and the entitlements of the community of whom we speak today. Now, for myself, ma'am, I will confess that my own education on the issue of disability came not from the pages of books. It came not from any sojourn within any university. That was not my area of study. In this regard, I am a student. I am an amateur. I am without authority on the subject, except that with that confession, I further confess that my knowledge on this very important subject, and please don't be surprised at this, comes from listening to the radio. Sometime in the 1990s, there used to be a lot of radio programs that dealt with the rights of those with disability, mental and physical, since as the discussion develops, the public tends to focus more on the physical disability, and the public tends to forget the other disability that is non-physical and indeed mental, and we tend to forget the latter. Let us treat both areas of incapacity as being of equal importance and equal in their urgency for attention. So that is where I gained my education on this subject. I'm wondering whether I should say this one, but I will. I think this is a place of truth, and we need to speak the truth. I want to appeal to our radio stations in their daily contact with their audience, a considerable audience, to continue not only